It has particular significance for our modern world, and especially at Christmas. It is about journeying forward into the future, while also journeying back to remember the past.
Before dawn settles on another divided Christmas, the King's voice cuts through the noise with something rare in public life right now: restraint. Not spectacle, not grievance, not performance, but steadiness. King Charles speaks not as a man demanding attention, but as one who has endured enough pain to understand its cost. This year, his Christmas message lands differently because it comes from someone who has quietly carried weight after weight without turning it into drama. Weekly cancer treatments, family fractures played out on a global stage, the humiliation of dealing with a disgraced brother, and the ache of an estranged son. And yet, instead of bitterness, he chose peace. That choice alone tells you everything about the moment we're in. While headlines chase conflict, the king deliberately speaks above it. His words arrive at a time when communities feel unsafe, when wars dominate screens, and when trust in institutions feels paper-thin. Instead of naming enemies, he names values. Hope, reconciliation, the simple but radical idea that reaching out still matters, that generosity is not weakness, that silence can be dignified. If you've been feeling exhausted by constant outrage cycles, pause here, because this is where the contrast becomes clear. One path feeds division, the other asks for patience and courage. What makes this message resonate even more is the context behind it. This is not a monarch speaking from comfort. This is a king who marked the 80th anniversary of the end of the Second World War while undergoing treatment, who stood in remembrance of sacrifice while confronting his own mortality. A king who walked into the Vatican to pray, not to posture, and a king who made decisions his late mother could not, stripping Prince Andrew of titles, closing doors that needed closing, and absorbing the backlash that followed. Strength, in this case, wasn't loud, it was decisive. And then there is the unspoken absence that hovered over Christmas. Prince Harry, missing once again. No public reunion, no visible reconciliation. Yet even here, Charles chose not to escalate. His message was not a plea, not a rebuke, not a performance of hurt. It was an invitation. Peace is offered, not forced. That restraint may frustrate critics, but it reveals something deeper: leadership that understands timing. If you find yourself wondering what this silence really means, stay with me, because the answer isn't what the loudest voices want you to believe. As the Princess of Wales reminded the nation, life can feel fragmented and uncertain. That line wasn't accidental. It echoed the king's own approach: steady, measured, future-facing. If this perspective resonates with you, take a moment to support this channel by liking the video and sharing it with someone who values calm over chaos. We're just getting started, and the deeper meaning behind this Christmas message is only beginning to unfold.
The silence surrounding Prince Harry this Christmas has been louder than any statement, and in royal terms, absence is never accidental. While speculation raced ahead, King Charles chose not to fill the void with explanation. That restraint is the point. In a world addicted to reaction, the monarchy's most powerful move remains patience. Christmas, traditionally a moment of visible unity, exposed the fracture without needing a single word spoken. And yet, the king's message did not harden, it softened. That contrast matters. Where many expected bitterness, he offered calm. Where some demanded accountability, he offered reflection. This is where the deeper meaning emerges. Charles understands that reconciliation cannot be forced through speeches or public gestures. His message was not aimed at one son, one scandal, or one family dispute. It was aimed outward, toward a fractured society that mirrors his own private challenges. By refusing to personalize the pain, he elevated it. The king spoke of peace at a time when peace feels almost unfashionable. When outrage sells, he chose unity. When accusations trend, he chose silence. Consider the timing. As attacks on Jewish communities rise and global conflicts deepen, Charles positioned the monarchy not as commentator, but as convener. This has been his lifelong role, bringing people together without inflaming division. His illness has only sharpened that instinct. Weekly cancer treatments have not slowed his work ethic. In fact, they seem to have clarified it. Being named the hardest working royal of the year under these conditions isn't just a statistic, it's a statement. Duty, for Charles, is not conditional on comfort. Behind palace walls, those close to him suggest a man quietly preparing for legacy. Climate, community, culture, commonwealth, and now cancer. The added fifth C is not symbolic, it is deeply personal. Charles is using his own vulnerability to advocate for early diagnosis and compassion, not through spectacle, but through continuity. He keeps showing up. That is the lesson. Leadership doesn't pause for applause. The contrast with those who chose distance is impossible to ignore. While one side builds narratives, the other builds continuity. While some monetize grievance, Charles absorbs discomfort without complaint, and the public notices. Approval doesn't come from perfection, but from consistency. If you've ever wondered why the monarchy endures despite endless storms, this is why. It adapts without abandoning its core. As the year closes, hope is no longer abstract. Reduced treatment schedules, future travel plans, a king who is not retreating but advancing with intention. His Christmas message wasn't a conclusion, it was a signal. Calm is not weakness, silence is not surrender, and peace, offered without condition, remains the most radical gesture of all. If this perspective resonates, take a moment to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. These conversations matter more than ever. What makes this moment especially revealing is how the king's message landed not as instruction, but as invitation. He did not lecture the public about morality. He did not frame himself as a victim of circumstance. Instead, he positioned himself as a witness, someone who has seen enough pain, both public and private, to understand that escalation only multiplies loss. That restraint is rare in modern leadership, and it is precisely why it carries weight. When a man enduring cancer treatment and family fracture still chooses empathy, it reframes what strength looks like. There is also a generational contrast unfolding quietly. King Charles belongs to an era where endurance was prized over exposure, where duty was lived rather than narrated. That worldview clashes sharply with today's culture of confession and constant self-justification. Yet, rather than reject the modern world, Charles has found a way to coexist with it. He speaks just enough to guide, then steps back. His Christmas message was carefully balanced, acknowledging global suffering without exploiting it, recognizing uncertainty without amplifying fear. The absence of Prince Harry from the royal Christmas tableau inevitably sharpened the focus, but the king refused to let that absence dominate the narrative. This is significant. In royal history, family conflict has often spilled into public retaliation. Charles chose the opposite. By not centering his son's absence, he deprived the moment of drama and redirected attention to collective healing. Silence, in this case, was not avoidance, it was containment. Those close to the palace note that this approach mirrors how Charles has handled his illness. No melodrama, no retreat, just continuity. Weekly treatments followed by full schedules, state duties carried out with visible resolve. When the king visited the Vatican and prayed with the Pope, it was more than symbolism. It was a declaration that faith, service, and perseverance still belong in public life. In a year defined by instability, he modeled steadiness. The Princess of Wales' words at the carol concert echoed this same philosophy. Fragmentation, uncertainty, and fear have become familiar companions for many, yet her message, like the king's, emphasized reaching outward rather than inward. This alignment is not accidental. It signals a monarchy recalibrating itself around emotional intelligence rather than authority alone. That evolution may well define its survival. Critics often underestimate the power of tone. They look for policies, punishments, or pronouncements, but tone shapes trust. Charles's tone this Christmas was gentle without being weak, hopeful without being naive. It suggested a man who understands that reconciliation cannot be demanded, only made possible. Whether within families or nations, peace begins by lowering the temperature. If you find value in this deeper reading of royal moments, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss future analysis. Share this video with someone who appreciates thoughtful perspectives beyond the headlines.
What also deserves attention is how deliberately the king framed peace as an active choice rather than a passive wish. He spoke of reconciliation not as a sentimental ideal, but as work that requires patience, humility, and a willingness to absorb discomfort without retaliating. That framing matters, especially in a year when outrage has become currency and grievance has become identity. Charles's message quietly challenged the idea that moral clarity must be loud to be legitimate. His emphasis on convening, a role he has long embraced, feels especially relevant now. Long before becoming king, Charles positioned himself as a bridge between communities, faiths, and cultures. Critics once dismissed this as soft diplomacy, but in a fractured world, convening is power. When dialogue collapses, conflict accelerates. By reaffirming that role in his Christmas message, Charles reminded audiences that leadership is often about keeping doors open long after others have slammed them shut. The global context cannot be separated from the personal one. Wars in Europe and the Middle East, rising anti-Semitism, and social polarization at home all formed the backdrop to his words. Yet he resisted the temptation to catalogue grievances. Instead, he focused on the quiet good, the people helping neighbors, rebuilding communities, and choosing decency when cruelty would be easier. This reframing shifts attention from spectacle to substance, from fear to agency. There is also something quietly radical in the king's refusal to center himself. Despite enduring cancer treatment and managing historic family turmoil, he did not foreground his own suffering. He acknowledged hardship without exploiting it. In an era where personal struggle is often amplified for validation or leverage, this restraint stands out. It signals confidence rather than suppression, suggesting a man secure enough not to demand sympathy. Behind palace walls, aides describe a monarch increasingly comfortable with his role. The early uncertainty that followed his accession has given way to focus. The reduced treatment schedule announced for the coming year was received not as an endpoint, but as a continuation. Charles is not signaling retreat, he is signaling stamina. Plans to travel, engage the Commonwealth, and deepen work around climate, culture, and community reflect a king thinking in terms of legacy rather than survival. That fifth priority, added after his diagnosis, is perhaps the most personal. By using his platform to highlight early diagnosis and cancer care, Charles transforms private illness into public purpose without turning it into performance. This balance mirrors the broader tone of his reign so far: purposeful, restrained, and quietly principled. In contrast to louder figures on the global stage, Charles's approach may seem understated, but understatement is not absence, it is discipline. His Christmas message suggested that the monarchy's future does not lie in competing with influencers or outrage merchants, but in offering something rarer: continuity without rigidity, compassion without chaos. As the year closes, that may be the most enduring takeaway. Peace, as Charles framed it, is not the denial of conflict, but the refusal to let conflict define everything. In a world addicted to reaction, he offered reflection. In a culture of fracture, he modeled steadiness. That lesson extends far beyond the palace walls.
As the season of reflection settles in, the real power of the king's message lies in its contrast to the noise surrounding it. Where others shout, he steadies. Where institutions fracture under pressure, he emphasizes repair. This is not accidental. It reflects a lifetime spent preparing for moments exactly like this, moments when symbolism matters as much as action. Christmas messages are often dismissed as ceremonial, but this one functioned as quiet leadership, setting a tone rather than issuing commands, guiding without insisting. There is also an unspoken reassurance embedded within his words. For a nation and a commonwealth that has endured years of upheaval, uncertainty, and loss, the king presented continuity without stagnation. He did not deny pain, but he refused to let pain dominate the narrative. Instead, he elevated responsibility, urging people to look outward, to serve, to reconnect. In doing so, he subtly reminded audiences that unity is not something we wait for, it is something we practice. If this message resonated with you, take a moment to reflect on how leadership shows up in your own life. Then share this perspective with others who value calm over chaos. Subscribe for more thoughtful royal analysis, and let us know in the comments whether messages like this still matter in a fractured world.